Welcome to the Trailblazers. I'm your host, Perry Rarick. The purpose of the Trailblazers is to share with you interesting and thought-provoking discussions I have with trailblazing business leaders. They're innovative, they're experts at what they do, and they're not afraid to challenge the status quo. My returning Trailblazer guest today is Joe Renny. He is the head of corporate development at CatSci Ltd, a Keensight capital-backed company and a UK-based contract research organization. Joe is a strategic leader at the intersection of science and business, a very busy, complex intersection in which he is responsible for driving growth strategy, acquisitions, and partnerships in small molecules, oligonucleotides, peptides, and other advanced medicines. Joe has extensive scientific experience. He earned his PhD in chemistry at the University of Bristol in collaboration with AstraZeneca, followed by postdoctoral research at the Weizmann Institute of Science at Cornell University. Early in his career at Dow Chemical, he worked with pioneering teams advancing catalytic processes and new materials before pivoting to the exciting stuff, right? Strategy and deal making. He was awarded a scholarship for his MBA at Warwick Business School. Joe has since built a track record in M&A execution, private equity advisory, and cross-border partnerships that translate deep science into commercial value. Joe, it's an honor to have you back as a guest. Welcome once again to the Trailblazers.
Great to be here with you, Perrick, and thank you very much.
We're going to have a lot of fun. So we first spoke, you were a guest on the Trailblazers nearly a year ago. Yep. A lot has happened. This has been a big year. So what have you been up to in this year?
Sure. I guess maybe it's good to take a moment of pause because it's 15 years of CatSci this year, and taking some time to reflect and working with our partners. I looked at what's happened over the last 15 years in terms of drug development. And honestly, I can say that remarkable achievements have been made in the treatment of cancer. And one of the things that I've written about this year is just how much things have improved, but also on reflection, where we've still got opportunities to develop breakthrough therapies. But it's certainly true that in some disease areas, survival rates are now well above 90% and almost complete remission and recovery in some areas. So we continue to work with a lot of great, small and extremely large companies across biotech and pharmaceuticals, developing really innovative medicine. And the only thing that's really, that's changed is over the last year is that they still want to work. The thing that stayed the same and that's changed is they want to move faster, right? Everyone wants to get to clinic faster, wants to get more granular data, and get to the patient more quickly. So it's still an exciting place.
Thanks for saying that. You know, we don't often enough pause and look what ground has been covered by therapy innovation. And you did that very well. That's worth celebrating. But at the same time, there's still a lot more to do.
Yeah, an awful lot more to do. And glioblastoma, for example, is one area for which anything in neurodegeneration, there are massive challenges. Survival rates from glioblastoma are really very challenging, and completely new therapeutics and treatments are needed there. There are advents in areas like radiopharma, for example, radiopharmaceuticals, which may have application both in diagnostics and in treatment of diseases of the brain and cancer. I think we can look to the future with some optimism, but with the realization that there's still so much to be done. Cancers of the lung as well, still very challenging too. And again, it's those advent in understanding, biological pathways, basic science, and then trying to drug the biology in those basic pathways. And that, remains a substantial motivator for people that want to deliver breakthrough treatment to patients with the most agonizing need. And so there's a moral driver, a scientific driver, and obviously a commercial driver in all of these things, and they come together to make the industry really in 2026, a year on from us speaking, incredibly exciting.
Yeah, it really is. So I want to take advantage of having you here and your keen insights on what's going on globally and your appreciation of history. So I want to tap into that a little bit. We're recording this in the middle of August 2026. And so on August 13th, 65 years ago, the Berlin Wall went up. And although the Cold War started before that, it was certainly a significant event marking the early stages of the Cold War. And when you and I spoke recently, you kind of talked a little bit about what's going on globally with drug development, where the innovations are coming from, where the financial backing's coming from, where the efficiencies in production and clinical trials and all of that. And you kind of said there might be a new Cold War established in these alliances. Can you tell me what you mean by that?
Sure. I think you and I both agree that science shouldn't have any borders, and that collaboration and intellectual development of science for the betterment of mankind shouldn't have any borders or any barriers. We live in a world where perhaps history will teach us that the realities of the time mean that whilst individuals collaborate very well, that there are challenges of collaborating across nations. And whilst over the last 20, 25 years, 25, 30 years ago, you'd have expected a big pharma company to be the originators of the most innovative medicines and to discover and develop them internally. We obviously see now that it's biotech that's the driver of that discovery. And from a perspective of creating a framework to kind of understand it, you can see things being driven through a sovereignty lens. And maybe there are four aspects to that sovereignty framework which become kind of relevant to break things down. One, you have the sovereignty over who originates a molecule, right? What target have they selected? How have they tried to drug against it? What's the composition of matter? And even before that, the implications of how is that basic research been funded, so you even know how to go after that drug target. And so you've got states funding breakthrough innovation in the past through, being spun out of universities, for which, the US has historically always been world class. But for now, China is also emerging as, an amazing contributor to global innovation. Something that we don't take for granted, given the conversations that you and I have, is probably a second point where the process and the know-how around that process is an aspect of sort of like of sovereignty, which goes beyond intellectual, and it also goes beyond borders because of supply chain. And we know through COVID that that's incredibly important. So security over your supply chain and how that's maintained and the actual knowledge curation around that has a significant influence over getting medicines to patients who are in need, but over who really captures value and how that value is converted and what the impact of failing to maintain that manufacturing capability is, along with discovery capability in and outside of companies, in and outside of nations means. Lastly, or penultimately even rather, data, who owns that data? And, are we talking about clinical data, patients, trials, the throughput around that? What about the data in massive healthcare systems like the NHS, where we've got companies like Palantir involved, or you've got Cerner Corporation, which is now part of Oracle, and you've got massive data curation. So you might have Western standards around that, around the curation of data, fiduciary responsibility, shareholder responsibility, but then you've also got the implications of, what about if you've got huge data centers in China, and you've got the emergence of China in terms of clinical trials and becoming increasingly sophisticated in running clinical trials and the number of clinical trial starts. Where's that data generated? How much do you trust it? And how do you maintain transparency, and the implications of that transparency in the global patent system and regulatory system has significant implications. And then lastly, not only who sets the price and who gets the rent of the innovation over a period of time, be it a patent, but is payment through patents and through that form of innovation, and through that measure of capturing innovation, robust and sustainable, and does it meet the time horizons for the development of technologies and the speed at which they develop? AI will change that, right? AI will change the ability to capture innovation, generate innovation, but we've also got significant implications around whether in certain areas of technology things move so quickly. Can you even capture patents and the value from patents when you're on rented foundations? For example, tech bio, where the frontier models, no matter what you're doing with the data that you have or the knowledge that you have, are owned by someone else. So I would say that most European tech bio companies are on rented foundations. So those are the kind of things that have been going through my mind and how I'm kind of trying to think about the arguments that are relevant.
No time to sleep at night, I imagine, with all of those thoughts running through your head.
Few 2 a.m. sessions reading things.
We seem to be in an era of new protectionism, certainly in the United States. It's spanning into Europe, the UK, and other parts of Europe. And it's like a chessboard that's being reset. Is China winning in this new era? Or maybe that's not even the way to look at it. They're certainly making ground. Yeah.
I think China's become a phenomenal contributor to global innovation. And is it too soon to tell if there's a winner? The answer is yes. And is it too soon to tell what the strategic game that is being played is? Probably, right? Someone once said that history is just one thing after another, and the economics isn't that much better in terms of analysis. And I would say that thinking about China has its own approach to protectionism and its own legislation and its own response to trade policy as a means of maintaining industrial strategy and competitiveness. What it does have, and what it has done well, is to invest and deploy strategy and capital in a layered approach, not over years, but over decades, and to recognize the importance of foundational industries in building the sort of the foundations of the most technologically advanced industries that follow on top of them. So chemicals like bulk and fine chemical production, API production, advanced synthesis, advanced biology, and how they all layer onto drug discovery and drug development. And then recognizing the importance of supply chain and international relationships within that. So they have legislation that they've passed about where your company has to be registered, what kind of corporate structures you can have, where the IP is captured. If you're interacting with patient data, that you have to be a registered company in China, and it has to be a legitimate corporate structure. And similarly, now, for very good strategic reasons and for reasons of national security and supply chain security, in the US, you've had discussions and now, firming up of the Biosecure Act. You've got coins and you've got bins that are all being discussed and taken to Congress, and they're being these legislation is being taken to Congress in a manner which is bipartisan. And it's critical, as we've seen during COVID, that the US and Europe maintains sovereign supply of medicines, which means the whole supply chain. And that also then goes back to, basic chemicals, having the materials to sterile fill finish, to products so that you don't run out of essential medicines, and that you've got an approach to the supply chain which is robust. And I would say that that's responsible. People like Eric Schmidt, the former CEO of Google, have written, extensive reports within the last year, 18 months, about the importance of maintaining the supply chain, but also the strength of the US in generating primary innovation and converting that primary innovation into companies, clinical trial starts, and exits. But you're also seeing very interesting and important economic structures where a company might be registered in Delaware and the private capital might be deployed in China, and with clinical trials globally distributed so that you get the best value for money out of your investment. And for sure, China is an attractive place to discover and develop medicines at the moment. I'd argue so is the US, and highly innovative. And venture capital is doing what venture capital does. It's placing the best bet it can in the best way it can. And so you're seeing particularly interesting deal structures and very large amounts of capital being deployed for new structures of companies.
It's the smart folks, the professionals like you that think about this, think about it as supply chain, drug therapy supply chain. And it's very complex globally. It's fragile. We learned that during COVID. A lot of what's taking place now is, I don't want to say it's a reaction to COVID, but it's certainly with that in mind, to shore it up. And barriers have to be brought down, not built like the Berlin Wall, but brought down, and these alliances formed. I want to take that a step further to something you brought up, which is the data and IP. And do we need a new kind of new method to protect IP? Has the patent outlived its usefulness on a global scale in this particular, in this industry?
I think I'll say two things before I go into what I think is an appropriate framework to understand, or at least to begin to understand, the value or how knowledge is generated, curated, and then protected. The patent still has value, number one, and number two, the patent has to be respected. And IP violations and protection of IP violations have been very significant. Probably about 18 months ago, I was interviewed for Chem Engineering News about a company that was generating human serum albumin in China from genetically engineered rice. And it ended up at the ITC because it was very clear that there'd been a violation of intellectual property by workers that had gone from working in one region to China, without going into too much detail about it. And so I think that the regulation and respect for patented innovation is becoming greater in China as it seeks to sell its own innovation to the rest of the world, and it sees that as a means of financial exit. And again, I'd like to bring up later on why I think that's so important, given how its financial structure is organized. However,
that's promising, as you described that, and the changes taking place in China. That's good news.
I think the reason why I say that is because I speak to IP lawyers all the time who are looking at different deals, and they've had problems in China, and have said it's getting better, but it's still tough, right? And so I'm not saying that I would discount IP considerations and where you do early development or early discovery work as not very significant, particularly when you consider how far ahead you are in your program, what commitment you've got to your program going into clinic, etc., and how your data is protected. but I think it's well known there are organizations that are better and weaker than others. And it's well known that the size of the organization that you are will impact your ability to protect your innovation. And so there's not a blanket answer there about that. And hence I said patents need to be protected and that they still have value, but they have value when they're protected. I think that it's important to come on to later on why China is so reliant on externalizing its innovation, because it doesn't have the internal market that the US does for commercialization of any technology in quite the same way, and certainly for medicines where fewer innovative medicines are listed on Chinese formularies because it's essentially still controlled by the state in some manner. And so unless you're extremely rich, you won't have access necessarily to all the breakthrough innovation that's possible. But I think the concept that's most helpful for understanding the value of IP is a concept by Charles Fine from MIT called clock speed. And when you combine clock speed with IP and you think about the value of capturing IP, that's particularly important. So the clock speed concept basically says that industries run at different speeds. So when I say that they run at different speeds, you do basic research in chemicals, and then you build infrastructure. It takes you decades to return value. And because of the difficulty in driving breakthrough innovation in the chemical sector, which is paradigm shifting, it's incrementally harder and harder to actually make those innovations. So it takes longer and longer. So even though you might have patented something over 20 years, which you would have done if you've protected a patent and you've carried on paying the licenses that you need to pay, the fees you need to pay to protect that patent, it's the case that it might take you decades longer to get the value from it. If you look at chemicals, where you can discover, develop, and launch a drug in probably 12 years in a good case, some instances much faster, and with genetically based medicine and targeting, and with probably adaptations to the regulatory system in this country, well, globally in the US and throughout Europe, which is necessary, we'll get faster and better at that, while still maintaining standards. And the US is an innovator in this area, and it must not lose that. It mustn't lose its ranking as the most globally important innovator of medicine from a regulatory perspective. That patents over a 20-year life have more or less met the clock speed of delivering value from the time it takes to innovate over that cycle and to start selling it. There are other follow-on patents you can have as well in medicines that mean that, it's a well-played game by large pharmaceutical companies, and they seem to do all right. But when you're in AI, for example, or you can tell that the advancements that are taking place in frontier AI models are so fast that you don't really have the time. You don't even really have the time to capture the IP, and it also might not be possible in quite the same way. Reverse engineering of patents and of inventions and discoveries is still legally allowed. So there are instances where, and other people have written about the value of know-how, and that know-how is perhaps as important and more valuable than capturing primary IP in some instances. And when you link that to where the manufacturing takes place, it then becomes extremely critical, because if you've got an end market for your innovation and you're controlling the supply chain of that, if, for example, the clock speed is fast or slow, you've got a much greater chance of maintaining or at least extracting maximum value of that innovation. And one could argue that China has done that extremely well from a service perspective and from a manufacturing perspective, but not from a commercial perspective. And certainly that's true at the moment in China. And therefore, Andrew Collier, Michael Petit, and others would argue that there is a capital absorption paradox in China, that they simply don't have the end market for their innovation. So they are in a cold war with the US for innovation, and particularly in AI. But the problem is, who's going to buy it? Who's going to pay for it? If it continues to be state-backed to a very large extent, and it doesn't have the high premium that you could get in West, then it will be a problem over time to get your money out. that's something that other economists like Philippe Agnon, who won the Nobel Prize, have spoken about. And one of the things that they've spoken about is that when there's investment made in China, it's made in several different companies in the space. And that increases very significantly the competitive advantage of those companies in the space. And they continue to keep on developing their innovation.
Yeah. I mean, for those of us in the West, we're a little skeptical about governments picking the winners. But there's a model emerging from China that's becoming more acceptable, and maybe it's a better model.
I think there's a sense that in China they let a free for all happen, and then they regulate. But investments in companies or in organizations tends to follow the pattern that actually they invest in a lot of different companies in the space, and then they all compete against each other, and that makes them very aggressive in developing that innovation.
Yeah. I was speaking to somebody yesterday that talked about how quickly the company he's with, which is a China-based company that makes equipment in this space for production. And when the leadership says, we have an idea, they're very quick to back it and move out quickly to make it so. More efficiently, and this gentleman's from the US, more efficiently than any other company he's ever been with.
That's an interesting cultural observation. And so when I speak to friends of mine that work for Chinese organization, to use like Roger Martin phrase, play to win, they're definitely using a play to win approach, right, where they don't leave anything on the field. So from my perspective, having spent a significant amount of time in the US and time in Hong Kong and in Singapore, my view is that once the US decides that there's a game to play, and they'll play to win, right? And you can see changes in various large companies in how they're deciding to play in China, not just licensing, but you can see, AstraZeneca's got the iCampus, right? Loads of other large pharmaceutical companies have got organizations. And now, and as as we spoke about previously about alliances. So had you formed the right structures and alliances, is then the maturity in capital markets, maturity in how IP and know-how are going to be protected, and the legal structure that protects the investment? Because akin to that, one of my mentors who's been, a CEO of a FTSE 100 listed company and a CAC listed company said to me, Joe, anytime I had a business in China, I lost money, right? And so I think it's interesting that it's almost certainly the case that large pharma companies going to China will benefit greatly from their innovation and from commercializing it. So I guess it's learning the right model and the right commercial model to collaborate and to build these relationships. And I think that's what's causing or has encouraged VC and private equity to structure different models. And, and they're very experienced in doing that.
Yeah. A lot to chew on there. I'm going to change the subject a bit. So I just read a statistic getting ready for our discussion here. For the first time since the 1990s, the number of investigational drug candidates declined, nearly 4% globally in 2025, the first time since the 1990s. That sounds like a discovery problem. Where do you think we have a discovery? Do you think the industry has a discovery problem? Where's discovery coming from? What are your thoughts on that?
So I guess there are like lies, damn lies, and statistics, right? And say I think there's some argument between different people about the numbers, right? But I think the point you make is actually far more important, and it's more important than how many INDs there are, right? And the point is that there has been far less of a focus where the capital is on breakthrough innovation and on discovery, and being close to that discovery, and so close that large organizations, large pharma organizations, are focused on development of breakthrough technology internally rather than in relying on it externally. And that is going to have to change, in my view. In my view, that will have to change because know-how is as critical to commercialization, or to discovery and commercialization of breakthrough medicines, as licensing and commercializing it is. And I think that there is the possibility of a challenge within the sector by companies with even deeper pockets than large pharma companies. And you can see that now, not in the periphery, but in actuality, with the amount of money that's gone into AI drug discovery companies and organizations like Isomorphic Lab, which are extremely credible, for example. They've got extremely credible people within them. And there are instances of large data-related companies looking at how they can actually get closer to drug discovery and drug development. So if Big Pharma doesn't pick up where it's left off again and start to focus on discovery, and also the state focusing on making sure it invests in breakthrough discoveries, serendipity-based research, but also directly investing in breakthrough research. One of my favorite anecdotes is that Wi-Fi came out of a telescope, right? And that the guy who managed to work out how to stabilize the radio signals and interact with them with the mathematics that he developed, Fourier transform mathematics, if I'm not mistaken. That technology was then used much later on, was patented for Wi-Fi. And, the Australian research organization made something like $400 million back, which is a drop in the ocean. So probably the amount of revenue generated from anyone that was working in Wi-Fi. But you get my point, that actually it's about making sure that you value early stage discovery in all environments and you seek to protect that. And I think whilst the Trump administration has made changes in the US, and there's a big issue at the moment with funding early stage research through NIH, etc., it's probably also shaken up in a necessary way some of the perspective of how you value or how you focus on creating value from that early stage research. So not all disruption is right, but not all disruption is bad. And so maybe that's a good outcome from some of the disruption, while it's absolutely necessary that money does go back into early stage research in the US, and we do get those starts back.
Is AI going to make this better, more efficient? Are we going to be able to determine what's going to fail earlier so that we don't get to this investigational drug candidate stage? We understand that this isn't worth pursuing. We're not going to waste money on that. And we're able to identify the successes earlier in the development process.
I think it has the potential to make some people and some organizations far more productive from inception and discovery all the way through to clinical trials. But all of these models rely on having data to train against, and unless it does what most human beings can't do, and in a godlike manner creates or discovers a completely new understanding of, say, biology, science, technology, then my anticipation is that AI will make a vast contribution over time to drug discovery and drug development and many other areas. But you will ultimately make some people more productive because they were already exceptionally productive and knew where to focus. And so I met a chap who you could call a gentleman scientist. He's very eminent, had his own research institute, worked with two extremely esteemed scientists, one who won the Nobel Prize, and he's essentially at home with his wife doing breakthrough drug discovery work on macrocyclic peptides with really complex biological targets at home using AI and building their own approach to it in a way that when they go to conferences is vastly superior than companies that have got billions of dollars to spend and large teams working on this problem because they know what they're doing and they spent the last 30 years with that level of specialization. So there are some things that I think will be achieved in a way that is phenomenal, and other things where you will still need the learned professional.
It's amazing. What an agile model you just described. A man at home with his wife and a laptop computer. Amazing. So AI is naturally going to want to encroach in making critical decisions. It's going to want to critically think for us, and it's going to run, and I'm going to use your term, and it's going to run into human beings with know-how. How's that going to work?
So I'm a big fan of Schumpeter and Carlota Perez and the creative destruction, right? And then, you'll get creative destruction from that. That ultimately, when you mix somebody who has an absolute focus for domain expertise and for discovery, and has just got that persistence, and persistence is a rare quality to carry on, beyond the bounds of what most human beings would accept in terms of failure on the way to success. It's absolutely critical. Then that person is given the resources to continue to move beyond where they could, on their own. And AI is that tool, right? Because it's a force multiplier of that individual. And when you go into organizations like Genentech, for example, Genentech, I think, has been Genentech Roche has been one of the most interesting collaborations that's been structured in a company over the last several decades. And it's a highly innovative organization. At the same time, when Roche bought Flatiron's a data company, they were extremely forward thinking when they decided that they would take advantage of bringing that organization into Roche. But ultimately, it hasn't probably created the same level of value as if they had that tension, that creative tension on the outside, with different teams motivated by working together and collaborating, but from the outside, where you had to continue doing that hard work. Because you have that, ultimately, you've got that customer buyer interaction that's like, well, if you want me to keep on buying your stuff, you better keep on making me think cleverer things than I could on my own. And so you need that tension. So things running into each other and having tension is a necessary part of, the discovery and ultimately, getting technologies to high readiness level process to such an extent that I would say that there's a problem if you've got an entirely satisfied drug discoverer or an entirely satisfied scientist, because they probably don't have enough innate curiosity to keep on trying to do things better.
I like that. To embrace the creative tension. That's great things will happen. Great stuff, Joe. Thank you very much. Thanks for being with us today. How can our listeners contact you?
On LinkedIn or via my email, which I'm happy to share in the notes for the meeting. But yeah, it's a real pleasure to be with you again, Perry, and I appreciate your own degree of consideration and understanding of the sector, because it's very great.
Well, yeah, you think about this so differently, and I just love the way you peel everything back, and you just talk about the challenges and not always challenges, but the circumstances that the industry faces differently in a way that they can be overcome. And I really appreciate that. And I'm sure many others do too.
Thank you very much.
Well, Joe, thank you very much for being with us today. My guest has been Joe Renny. He is with CatSci. And as you know, he's a big thinker. He's thinking about strategic things. He's responsible for corporate development, M&A, partnerships. And I encourage you all to reach out to Joe and have these great conversations with him personally. So thank you all for being with us. And Joe, thank you once again for being a trailblazer.
Thank you.